Hello everybody, I am Ben from Team Panic, and today we are doing the second video of Robot Havoc 4 and looking at Annie, Are You OK? Now those of you who have been watching the channel a little bit, I did an upgrade on Annie, Are You OK? And put a tangential or friction drive in her for this set of matches, and also made her a nice blue color. I will put a link to that in the description down below. So this is our first set of fights with this brand new system, which seems to have been working quite well here in testing. So how did it go in actual fights? Well, first cab off the rank is Lumberjack, which is always a tough fight for Annie. A nice vertical spinner versus Annie's undercutter horizontal spinner. It's always a bit of a throw of the dice as to who gets what hit and who does what damage.
3, 2, 1, go!
Yikes! So that didn't go particularly well. In the end there, we were high-sided on our own weapon. Basically, what happened there's a few little bits that happened. First, the weapon bolt caught on the floor, which is interesting because it's, not that far away from the floor, and the new floor has a seam in it, which, wasn't really expecting. And yeah, we got caught on the floor a little bit, which didn't help out all that much. This drive is also quite squirrely. I was finding it kind of difficult to go in a straight line. It was kind of taking off in one direction and I had to like curve it back again or lean into the steer and steer in a direction and go from there. So my driving wasn't great in this fight, I definitely will say that. And I got thrown upside down, and of course the problem with having the drive wheels on the front is that we can't easily like slam into a wall and self-right. So I did the only thing that seemed like the sane option, which was to drive into Lumberjack's weapon to self-right. Yeah, that wasn't a great option. We've survived that before. I think we've done that now 3 times, and our record on that is not great. The first time we did it, we definitely died. The second time we did it, I think we self-righted, and now this time we've done it, yeah, no. So maybe that's not the greatest idea to keep doing here in the future, but yeah, what happened in that hit is that the weapon pulley that was in the weapon system exploded, essentially, and yeah, moved all the bearings and stuff out of place, dropped the weapon down onto the floor, and got Annie caught up in it, which was a problem because the wheel that was in the air was moving, the other wheel was dead. The bearing had cracked, the outer bearing. I was using plastic bearings on both sides because I had plastic bearings on the inside mostly so they didn't rub and destroy the HDPE frame, and I just thought I'd whack plastic bearings on the outside as well. And yeah, unfortunately in that hit somewhere, one of them got completely annihilated, which meant that, yeah, the wheel was flopping around a little bit, and the friction drive, which relies on things being very closely pressed together and being exactly where they're supposed to be, stopped working, didn't work anymore. So yeah, the one wheel touching the ground, not doing a damn thing for us, which, yeah, I mean, that happens from time to time. So it did, of course, though, mean that I had to go through and replace some bearings, try and fix up the drive system, completely swap out the weapon stuff, and then, of course, go in and try and test all that. Unfortunately, the first time I did all of that stuff, it didn't work. The testing just didn't go very well. I didn't get any drive out of the system at all. I had to go back, had to tweak some things, had to bend some things back into shape to get the whole tangential drive system working properly. And with that working properly, I did manage to get Annie back into the arena and back on her wheels and running again. So our next fight up is against Choppy, which is a very, very large kind of scoopy wedge design robot. So I put on the disc for this fight because I knew that it was going to be one that I had to do a lot of damage in.
3, 2, 1, go!
didn't do quite enough damage in that fight. That fight was called a draw. His scoop on Choppy is incredible. It is like such a great shape for catching Annie's blade and stopping it from working. In actual fact, I think going up against him in the future, I'm probably going to run a bar because the actual disc shape was getting really caught up in that whole front wedge section. So it was very clear very early on that I couldn't keep going head to head with him. Did thankfully manage to get around the side a couple of times, knock out the first wheel, and from that point things started going wrong a little bit because while he wasn't driving very well, neither was Annie. The friction drive setup started to get a little bit shaky and started to not have the same amount of traction as it did before. So while I could still move, it was not very fast, not very far, and not very controlled. I was getting a lot more spinning than I wanted, and I wasn't getting straight lines very easily, which meant that the whole back end of that fight was two very limping robots with me trying desperately to get the weapon into that last wheel. And if my tangential drive system had worked just like 5% better, I would have been able to do that, and this fight would have ended very differently. Yeah, unfortunately though, that's not the case with this, and that's kind of what happens with experimental drive systems. This is my first time doing this type of drive system, and while I like it, I definitely didn't do it the best way possible in this event and with these sets of fights. So yes, there you go. Choppy ended up in a draw, and that was the end of the first day. I was supposed to also have a fight against Body Watt, but unfortunately Body Watt did not make it to the event, so they were disqualified and Annie has a win. So we've got a loss, a draw, and a win under our belt after the first day. Now, at this point, it was the end of the first day and I was looking at this drive system, and one of the drive motors was really loose. It was wobbling all over the place when you grabbed hold of the weapon shaft or of the motor shaft, and it turned out that's because it had lost a circlip and also one of its internal bearings. And looking inside the whole thing, I realized that the two bearings are basically stacked on top of each other. There's not a whole lot of actual bracing inside these motors, so the fact that I'm trying to have two tiny little bearings and putting pressure all the way out here means that it's very likely they're going to just explode, which is what's been happening in those two fights. So that night I spent a lot of time in my workshop here trying to work out what the best thing to do with Annie was, and trying to work out what I could possibly get done overnight. If I had my little CNC machine still running, this would have been a very easy choice. I would have remilled parts and I would have thrown brushed drive back in Annie, and that would have been that. We would have swapped back to the brush system and we would have been done. However, I did not have my CNC up and running, and I didn't think that 3D printed parts were going to cut it. I played around with modifying old arms or old sidewalls that I had for Annie, but nothing kind of fit easily or worked really easily. So what I ended up doing was swapping the blue motors, these tiny little 2204s, out for 2212. So they're a bigger motor, as in longer motor, which means that the bearings are further apart and are bracing things a little bit more. That did mean shuffling around some of where the motors mounted and how far out they mounted and things, but in the end I did manage to get it working. The joy of a 2-day event, you actually have time to work on these things. I mean, I didn't get to sleep early that night because of Annie, but we did get there eventually and we did get a new drive system working. With the new drive system, we were going up against Sorted History as our first fight up on day 2. This is going to be the last of the round robin fights.
Okay, so closer to you, you have got Sorted History. Closer to us and the competitors, we've got Annie. Are you okay? So, big match here. Ready to go? Alright, competitors, are we both ready? Big thumbs up. Okay. Good luck, everybody. Let's count it down. We'll start in 3, 2, 1. Game on. So this match is Number 2, coming up, sit down, is in the ring. That drop, let's see. Oh, we got that robot! Oh man, that damage was too much.
And this proved really promising. One of the things I did actually as well with the upgrade is I put some heat shrink sleeving on the motor shafts to try and get a little bit more grip, because I'd realized that these RC car tires that I'm running, they are from the 90s somewhere. They're just an old thing that was left over that I've been given, and the tangential drive was wearing them down quite significantly, I think because the rubber is old and kind of had it anyway. So I put the heat shrink on there to try and get a bit more grip and hopefully do less damage to the wheels, which seemed to work really nicely. Annie was driving a lot better in this fight, but she was even more squirrely because the bigger motors, which were the only ones I had that would actually work, were also slightly faster. They were 2,200 kV rather than 1,800 kV, and that did indeed make a difference. It definitely felt faster driving Annie in this configuration and in this setup. So on to the actual fight itself. We got some nice hits in at the start, getting a bit of a early Annie action out of that. And then unfortunately, Sorted History died. It had an ESC brownout issue. We think the point where Sorted History got the sword stuck in the floor, it's kind of subtle, but if you rewatch the fight, he does get the sword stuck in the floor and have to pull it back out. And we think that kind of jolt of energy that was required to do that left things a little bit hot and warm, and then a couple of extra hits and the whole thing just shut down. And yeah, didn't start back up again until everything was power cycled. Basically, it cooled down and everything was ready to go. So we did get that win, and that win actually put Annie through into the finals, which is a little bit interesting because it is technically 2 wins, a loss and a draw, and everybody got one of those wins because of course Body Watt was not there for the weekend, so everybody in our bracket had a win against Body Watt. But Choppy has the same driver as Iron Tooth, and the rules are that if you're driving 2 robots like I do, if you make both robots to the finals, you choose one of your 2 robots, and they're the one that goes through to the finals, and the other one forfeits, and the next person below them takes the place in the finals. So in this particular instance, Iron Tooth went through and Choppy did not, which left a spot open for Annie. Speaking of Iron Tooth, our first semi-final fight was against Iron Tooth, which had me worried because the tangential drive has been working really nicely up until this point, but it didn't do that great against Lumberjack, and the wheels are up front, fairly exposed, and I just knew that if we got a hit on these wheels, things were going to go really badly. So I wanted to try and avoid that, if at all possible.
Let's count these ones down. 3, 2, 1, game on!
I didn't avoid it. Yeah, no. Yes, so this is kind of the exact worst case scenario, what I was really worried about with an Iron Tooth fight. The first hit was fine. First hit was totally okay, other than the fact that it pushed me into the pit and I kind of got stuck there for a little bit, which was mostly just because I wasn't doing the right thing to back out and get out of the pit, but that didn't help maneuverability. The second hit, yeah, not so fine because it started to loosen up the motors, or one of the 2 motors in particular, which meant that I wasn't driving particularly well on that side and started spinning more in circles. The third hit removed the motor can from that motor entirely, which I did not realize until watching this footage back. I saw something go flying, but in my mind at that time, while I had my hands on the sticks, Annie was still driving, so I didn't think it was my motors, and I thought instead that it was the can off his weapon motor, and I was like, yeah, this is going to be awesome. His weapon's about to go down. And then, yeah, the fourth hit assuaged me of all of those notions because he hit directly on a wheel and everything exploded out of the back of Annie. Basically what happens, as far as I can see, or saw in the aftermath of that, is yeah, the wheel got hit, it bent and buckled the entire sidewall, it annihilated the motor mounts on both sides, and it removed the standoffs out of the back of Annie as well. It was just a mess. Yeah, so that went poorly, and we did indeed lose. And yes, going through after this fight, there was so much damage that I had to look through. The motor mounts could have been printed better, they could have been printed stronger, but of course I did this at like 9 o'clock at night, so I was aiming for speed and getting the parts out rather than having the parts be more solid, and it did kind of backfire a lot there, but it wouldn't have mattered too much anyway, because even if the parts hadn't been destroyed, one of the motors completely lost its motor can, so that was never going to work for us really. And yeah, if I'm going to do this type of thing again, I need to be more careful about that type of thing and the motor cans being able to come off. In fact, I think if we're doing this again, we need to push the shaft of the motor back through the other way and not run it out the end, but run it through the back and do it that way. I think that is going to be the more sensible way of doing this type of system. So anyway, I had a lot of work ahead of me because I then had to basically rebuild Annie from the ground up and put back in the old blue motors. Thankfully, I had one that was still kind of working, and then the other one I had a spare for, so I swapped in the spare and put it in the test box, or put it in the arena to try and test it out. Didn't go so well. Everything was warped and messy and not really working. I really had to go in with like channel lock pliers and wrench things around and really reform a lot of the plastic that makes up Annie. And then even with all of that, it wasn't enough. So I added 3 layers of heat shrink over the actual motor shaft so that there was more diameter there so it could grip harder onto the wheels. And with that, it mostly worked. She was driving, the weapon was spinning but making a horrible sound, which in hindsight I probably should have changed out the bearings, because I think that's where that sound was coming from, which is not a good thing to go into a fight with kind of half mangled bearings already. But anyway, we were up and driving, and that's all I really cared about at this point. It had taken a lot of time to get Annie back from her mostly destroyed state into something of a fight state. And we were up against Anti-Dozer. And this was going to be an interesting fight because neither of us were very optimistic about our chances. I had just gone through a massive rebuild, and Anti-Dozer had been having trouble all day where some sharp jolts were shutting off the robot, and they didn't quite know why. Very similar to what I was going through with It Works. If you haven't seen last week's video, do check that out, link in the description. Anyway, let's check this fight out.
Here we go, good luck everyone, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Game on, everyone.
It started so well. Annie was doing Annie things, taking out wheels, destroying things, having a lot of fun. It was good. And then this drive system punished me again. Yeah, so the pinging off the wall again kind of loosened up and wobbled some things around, and the frame here is not great at this point structurally, just because of how much damage Annie has taken over the weekend. So it didn't take much to loosen one side up, and then the other side, the heat shrink wore away entirely because I guess I was going too hard on the drive system. So then that final tap from the back loosened up the one side drive so that it was free spinning, and then the other side was free spinning because all of the heat shrink wore away. And just to add insult to injury, it was at that point that belt burn happened on the weapon, and so the weapon died as well. The weapon motor still totally fine, but yes, the belt has burnt out, so the bearing, so that the contact is not being made anymore. And yeah, we're just dead in the water, although not really dead. We're still, like, Annie's still there and electrically alive. It's just that none of the motors are now contacting any of the things that they need to be contacting for Annie to drive or spin her weapon. So yeah, and that was the third place playoff. I should have mentioned that. And so unfortunately Annie got fourth for the event, which is unfortunate. I liked the simplicity of this drive system. I thought it was going to be awesome, but this particular implementation, the implementation that I have built, was not a great solution in this set of fights. I really do need to go back to the drawing board and have a look at this. I don't know whether or not I want to go back to a tangential drive system on Annie. I might move the tangential drive system onto something else where I can build something that's more robust and not have to worry about weapon weight and things. Yeah, I might look at a geared, like a single stage geared system, or I might look at a brushless conversion, or I might just go back to the brush motors and deal with the grub screws, because that was the reason we moved away from the grub screw, from the brushed motors in general, was the grub screws. But grub screws performed better than this particular implementation of tangential drive. I'm not saying that this is like how tangential drive works all the time. I'm just saying it's how my tangential drive worked, which was not great. Yeah, so there's going to be a new version of Annie. I might stick with the blue. I might actually try again for a purple. I don't know. We'll see how we go on that one. But yes, things need to change because, well, things need to change. We also, I think, might start moving towards aluminium pulleys in Annie as well. They worked really, really well in It Works. And I am so sick of having to keep reprinting bearings and, not bearings, reprinting pulley blocks and things and having them burn out and all of that kind of stuff. So if we change all of that over to aluminium, I mean, it's going to suck up a bit of weight, but it should theoretically be more reliable, and that is going to be worth its weight in gold at this point in time. I think that's all I want to say about Annie at Robot Havoc 4. Look out for next week, where we look at Vogon Poetry and how it did in the Ant Weight A division. I'll see you in that video.